The Seattle rain fell in a steady, mournful rhythm against the towering windows of James Carter's modern hillside home, each droplet a quiet echo of the turmoil within. In the soft glow of Lila's bedroom, 9-year-old Lila Carter lay curled beneath a quilt, her small chest struggling with each breath, the weight of her cystic fibrosis a constant shadow. The high-tech monitors flanking her bed pulsed with green light, their rhythmic beeps a technological lifeline that tracked her oxygen levels and heart rate, yet offered no comfort against the fear in her wide brown eyes. James stood in the doorway, his tailored suit creased from a late-night board meeting at Vital Tech Innovations, where he reigned as the 40-year-old CEO of a company whose pediatric medical devices saved lives across the globe. But here, watching Lila's fragile form, he was just a father, helpless against the disease that stole her breath. 4 flare-ups in 2 weeks had drained her, each episode more severe than the last, her coughs sharp and relentless, her skin pale as moonlight. The most recent had been a nightmare, Lila gasping in the ER at midnight, her small hand clutching his as doctors stabilized her, the memory searing itself into James's mind. His empire of monitors and ventilators, built to protect children, like her, felt useless in the face of her frightened gaze. Downstairs, his mother Margaret moved through the kitchen with the quiet grace of her 67 years, her silver hair catching the dim light as she prepared Lila's evening medications. Since Anna's death 9 years ago, Margaret had been the glue holding their fractured family together, her warmth a steady anchor against the storms of grief and illness. She found James in his sleek home office, a fortress of glass and steel, cluttered with awards for innovations that couldn't ease his daughter's suffering. "James, we can't keep doing this," Margaret said, her voice gentle but unyielding as she placed Lila's medical chart on his polished desk. "These episodes are too frequent, too dangerous. Your monitors alert you, but they don't hold." Her hand when she's scared. James's jaw tightened, his fingers scrolling through data on his tablet, Vitaltech's latest prototype for a portable nebulizer, a project consuming his nights. "I'm handling it," he said, his tone clipped. "My systems notify me instantly. I know her stats better than anyone." Margaret's eyes, sharp with maternal instinct, held his. "Handling it from a conference call with Shanghai at 2 a.m. Lila needs more than alerts, James. She needs someone here, trained, present." He shook his head, his mind racing. With excuses. His devices were cutting edge, his company led the industry, but the image of Lila's trembling form in the ER gnawed at him, undermining his confidence. Margaret slid a folder across his desk, her gaze steady. "Elena Harper, pediatric nurse with cystic fibrosis expertise, top recommendation from Seattle Children's." James opened the file, his CEO brain cataloging her credentials. Years in pediatric intensive care, commendations for patient outcomes, specialized training in cystic fibrosis management. But his breath caught on a single line. 9 years ago, Eleanor had worked in the NICU at Seattle Children's, the same hospital where Lila had fought for every breath as a premature newborn, where Anna had slipped away during a postpartum hemorrhage. The coincidence sent a chill through him, stirring memories he'd buried under patents and profits. Anna's radiant smile in the hospital bed, her hand weak in his, the sterile hum of the NICU where he'd been too broken to stay by Lila's side. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing on Elena's qualifications. Impeccable, thorough, almost too perfect. "Why a stranger in our home?" he countered, his voice sharp with defensiveness. "My systems are enough." Margaret's patience thinned, her tone firm. "Your systems didn't calm her when she woke up coughing last night. They didn't explain why her chest hurts. A nurse can." James's mind flickered to Lila's small voice asking if she'd be okay. A question his technology couldn't answer. He rubbed his temple, the weight of his responsibility pressing harder than any boardroom decision. "Fine, set up an interview," he said, closing the folder with a snap. Margaret nodded, but her expression carried a warning. His empire of innovation meant nothing if it couldn't ease his daughter's fear. As she left to check on Lila, James's gaze drifted to a framed photo on his shelf, Anna, pregnant and glowing, her laughter a distant echo of the life they'd planned. 9 years ago, he'd been in Tokyo closing a deal when the call came about Anna's hemorrhage. Too late to say goodbye, too lost to sit by Lila's incubator. Now Lila's soft cough crackled through the baby monitor, pulling him back to the present. He rose, drawn to her room, where she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her eyes fluttering in restless sleep. The monitors glowed, their data precise, but cold, offering no solace for the panic he'd seen in her face during her last flare-up. He adjusted her blanket, his hand lingering, and wondered if Margaret was right, if his obsession with control had blinded him to what Lila truly needed. The rain outside intensified, a relentless reminder of the fragility of their world, where every breath was a victory, and every night a test. James returned to his office, the folder with Elena's name staring back at him, a challenge to trust. Someone beyond his machines. He opened it again, rereading her time at Seattle Children's, the dates aligning too closely with his darkest days. The thought of a stranger stepping into their home, into Lila's life, felt like surrender. But the alternative, another night of watching her struggle, of failing her again, was unbearable. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of Anna's absence and Lila's fragility pressing against his carefully constructed walls, threatening to crack them open. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through the Seattle drizzle, pulling James Carter from his restless thoughts as he paced the sleek hardwood of his home's foyer. At 8 p.m., Elena Harper stood on the threshold, her dark hair neatly pinned, her steady hazel eyes assessing the space with quiet confidence rather than judgment. James, still in his CEO mindset, extended a hand, his grip firm, but his voice clipped as he welcomed her. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming on short notice," he said, ushering her inside while detailing Lila's cystic fibrosis regimen, medication schedules, nebulizer settings, and the intricate web of monitors tracking her vitals. Elena listened, intently, her calm presence a stark contrast to his rapid-fire delivery, and when he finished, she asked a single question. What makes Lila feel safe when she's struggling? The simplicity of it stopped James cold, his mind blank as he realized he'd never considered such a basic need amidst his arsenal of technology. Upstairs, Eleanor moved with practiced efficiency, memorizing the layout of Lila's room, noting emergency exits and rearranging medical supplies for quick access during a crisis. Within 20 minutes, she'd optimized the nebulizer station, her hands deft as she adjusted the tubing. Lila, awake but weary from a recent coughing fit, watched her with cautious curiosity. Elena knelt to her level, her voice warm yet professional. "Can you show me how you use your nebulizer, Lila?" The girl demonstrated, her small hands trembling slightly, and Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Great job, but let's try a little tweak. Hold it at this angle and breathe in slowly like you're sipping air through a straw." Lila followed, her eyes widening as the mist felt smoother, less choking. "It's easier," she whispered, a spark of wonder in her voice. James, lingering in the doorway, felt a pang of unease. None of Lila's specialists had suggested such a simple adjustment, yet it worked. Elena's approach was different, human in a way his parade of pulmonologists hadn't been, speaking directly to Lila, with a warmth that disarmed her fear. At bedtime, when Lila's usual routine of stories and anxiety stretched on, James braced for the familiar struggle. Instead, Eleanor sat beside her, her voice soft as she introduced a cloud-counting game, guiding Lila to imagine fluffy clouds drifting with each slow breath. "Picture them floating, one by one, carrying your worries away," Eleanor said, her tone almost melodic. In under 10 minutes, Lila's breathing deepened into sleep, her face relaxed in a way James hadn't seen in months. He stood in the hallway, stunned by the minor miracle, his CEO composure shaken by how effortlessly this stranger connected with his daughter. As Elena emerged, he fumbled for words. "That was impressive." She smiled faintly. "Just a relaxation technique. I can teach you if you'd like." The offer, simple yet profound, unsettled him further, highlighting his own distance from Lila's emotional world. After Elena settled into the guest room for her overnight shift, James retreated to his office, unable to shake the flicker of recognition he'd caught in her eyes during their handshake. He pulled up her file again, the line about Seattle Children's NICU 9 years ago glaring back at him. The dates aligned with Lila's premature birth, with Anna's death, when James had been too consumed by grief to sit by his newborn daughter's incubator. Had Elena been there, one of the faceless nurses who'd kept Lila alive? The thought gnawed at him, stirring guilt he'd buried under years of achievement. Against his better judgment, he accessed the home's security system, activating a dormant camera in Lila's room, the feed flickering to life on his monitor. A precaution, he told himself, watching Elena check Lila's oxygen levels with gentle precision, her movements almost maternal. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression hardening as she caught him. "James, I raised you better than this." He minimized the feed, defensive. "It's just to ensure she's competent." Margaret shook her head, disappointment etched in her lines. "You don't measure care with cameras, you feel it, James, with your heart." Her words stung, dismantling his logic with their truth. And as she closed his laptop with quiet finality, he realized Elena's presence was already exposing cracks in the walls he'd built around his family. The polished elegance of prestige. Couture turned cold as Angela Carter stood before the sapphire blue clutch, its delicate gold filigree shimmering under the boutique's chandeliers, a beacon of beauty, in a moment growing uglier by the second. Richard Lawson. The store manager loomed nearby, his tailored suit and silver cufflinks, a stark contrast to Angela's modest navy coat, his eyes glinting with a calculated disdain as he spoke loud enough for all to hear our exclusive collections. "Ah, for serious clients, ma'am. Perhaps you'd find something more suitable in our accessory section." The words were a public slap, their venom cloaked in civility, designed to shame Angela into retreat, her jeans and simple flats marking her as an intruder in this world of wealth. The showroom's patrons turned like vultures drawn to the scent of conflict, their gazes sharp with intrigue as Evelyn Grant, a socialite in a cream silk dress, smirked, her diamond earrings catching the light with every tilt of her head. Charles and Laura Bennett, a couple draped in designer labels, paused their browsing, their faces alight with a mix of amusement and superiority as they whispered about the audacity of this plainly dressed woman. Angela felt the weight of their stares, a collective judgment that pressed against her chest, yet her posture remained unyielding, her eyes locked on Richard's with a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. She knew this was no mere refusal to show a handbag. It was a deliberate attempt to strip her of dignity in a space that glorified status over humanity. Sarah Miller, the young sales associate, lingered near a display of silk scarves, her hands fidgeting. With a price tag, her face flushed with unease as she witnessed Richard's cruelty unfold. Marcus Tate, the security guard, stood at the room's edge, his broad frame tense, his dark eyes flickering with discomfort as he sensed the injustice but feared the consequences of intervening. Angela's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a resolve forged in countless moments of being underestimated, her mind flashing to a teenage memory of being followed in a department store, her every move scrutinized as if her presence alone was a crime. That pain fueled her now, her voice steady as she responded, "I'm here to see the clutch, Mr. Lawson. I expect the same treatment as any customer." Her words were a direct challenge, slicing through the boutique's polished facade and exposing the bias beneath. Richard's smile tightened, his fingers brushing his cufflinks as he leaned closer, his tone dripping with mockery. "Our standards ensure only the right people handle our pieces. I'm sure you understand." The implication was clear. Angela's appearance, her lack of flashy wealth, marked her as unworthy a verdict delivered for all to hear. Evelyn let out a soft laugh, her hand covering her mouth as if watching a comedy, while Charles adjusted his tie, his eyes gleaming with condescension. Laura's lips pursed, her earlier curiosity turning to discomfort as if she sensed the line being crossed. Angela stood firm, her heart aching for every person who had faced this same public shaming, their dreams of belonging crushed under the weight of such arrogance. She noticed Sarah's hands tremble, her eyes darting away as if ashamed to witness the scene, yet unable to look away. Marcus shifted his weight, his jaw tight, his gaze dropping to the floor as if wrestling with his role in this unfolding drama. The boutique's air grew heavy, the scent of jasmine now oppressive as the weight of prejudice settled over the room. Angela's thoughts turned to her college roommate, a brilliant coder. who had been dismissed at job fairs for her natural hair, her talent ignored for not fitting the corporate mold. That injustice strengthened Angela's resolve, her voice rising with calm precision. "I've seen no one else questioned for browsing. Why am I the exception?" The question hung in the air, a spotlight on Richard's hypocrisy that made the patrons' whispers falter. Evelyn's laughter died, her face stiffening as if caught off guard, while Charles shifted uncomfortably, his glasses slipping slightly. Laura's hand tightened on her purse, her earlier amusement fading into a flicker of doubt. Angela knew she was exposing not just Richard's actions, but the boutique's entire culture of selective respect, a culture that thrived on keeping certain people out. Her heart carried the pain of countless others who had walked away from such places, their spirits bruised, their worth denied under the guise of propriety. Richard's eyes narrowed, his voice sharpening. "You're causing a disturbance, ma'am. I suggest you leave before this escalates." The threat was a gauntlet, thrown down, a public challenge to Angela's right to exist in this space. The customers. Phones emerged, some filming discreetly, others openly, their faces a mix of shock and fascination as the confrontation became a spectacle. Angela stood taller, her gaze unyielding, her heart a furnace of purpose, fueled by every slight she'd endured. She responded, her voice soft but piercing. "I'm not disturbing anything. I'm asking for fairness, something this store claims to value." The truth of her words silenced the room for a heartbeat, the chandeliers casting stark shadows across the marble floor, their light revealing the cracks in a world built on exclusion. Angela knew this moment was a turning point, her stand a spark that could ignite a reckoning for prestige couture and beyond. The atmosphere in prestige couture crackled with hostility as Richard Lawson, the store manager, squared his shoulders, his polished exterior a thin veneer over the raw authority he wielded to crush Angela Carter's quiet demand to see the sapphire blue clutch. His earlier dismissal had drawn a crowd, their eyes glinting with the thrill of a public spectacle. But now his voice rose, sharp and commanding, as he declared, "Our policies are non-negotiable, ma'am. Only verified clients can access our premiere collections. You're wasting everyone's time." The words were a deliberate assault, laced with contempt, meant to humiliate Angela before the boutique's elite patrons, her modest navy coat and canvas tote, a stark contrast to the glittering world he guarded. Evelyn Grant, perched on a velvet stool, sipped champagne, her lips curling in a smug grin, her diamond bracelet flashing as she nodded in approval of Richard's dominance. Charles and Laura Bennett stood near a display of cashmere shawls, their faces etched with the cold satisfaction of those accustomed to seeing outsiders put in their place, their whispers barely concealed. Angela felt the sting of their collective judgment, a wall of scorn that threatened to suffocate her, yet her heart remained steady, her eyes locked on Richard's with a defiance that seemed to unsettle his composure. She knew this confrontation was no longer about a handbag. It was a battle for her right to be seen as equal in a space that thrived on rigid hierarchies. Sarah Miller, the young sales associate, hovered near a counter of crystal earrings, her hands twisting a cleaning cloth, her eyes darting between Angela and Richard, her face pale with the weight of witnessing an injustice she felt powerless to stop. Marcus Tate, the security guard, stood rigid, his broad frame a reluctant sentinel, his dark eyes clouded with unease as Richard's command to prepare to escort Angela out loomed like a dark cloud. Angela's mind flashed to a moment from her early career when a senior executive had questioned her presence at a gala, assuming she was staff, her credentials ignored until she forced the room to acknowledge her. That memory fueled her now, her voice cutting through the tension with measured precision. "I'm a customer here to shop, Mr. Lawson. Your policies seem to bend for others. Why not for me?" Richard's face twitched, his cufflinks glinting as he stepped closer, his tone now a theatrical sneer. "We protect our brand's integrity. Not everyone qualifies to handle our inventory." The accusation was a public branding. Angela's appearance, her lack of ostentatious wealth, deemed a threat to the boutique's sacred order. Evelyn's grin widened, her champagne glass raised in a mock toast, while Charles adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes gleaming with the arrogance of privilege. Laura's face softened slightly, her discomfort flickering as if she sensed the cruelty in Richard's performance. Angela stood taller, her heart pounding with the pain of every person who had been dismissed in such spaces, their worth reduced to their attire. She noticed Sarah's cloth slip from her hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, as if she wanted to speak but feared Richard's wrath. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight, his gaze pleading with Angela to avoid escalation, yet his hesitation spoke of a deeper conflict within. The boutique's chandeliers cast harsh light across the marble floor, their glow no longer enchanting, but exposing the ugliness of a system that rewarded exclusion. Angela's thoughts turned to her mentor, a community leader who had faced boycotts for challenging discriminatory practices, her courage a beacon for Angela's stand now. Her voice rose, calm but unyielding. "I've seen no verification demanded of others today. Your standards seem to shift, depending on who walks in." The truth of her words silenced the crowd's murmurs. Evelyn's glass pausing mid-air, her smirk faltering. Charles shifted uncomfortably, his tie suddenly too tight, while Laura's hand gripped her purse, her earlier amusement replaced by a flicker of shame. Angela knew she was dismantling not just Richard's authority, but the boutique's entire ethos of selective respect, a system that thrived on keeping people like her out. Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous low, his hand gesturing to Marcus. "This is your final chance to leave quietly, or I'll have you removed for disrupting our operations." The threat was a desperate bid to reassert control, but Angela's unwavering calm made it clear she would not bend. The patrons' phones glowed brighter, some filming openly now, their faces a mix of shock and intrigue as the confrontation became a public trial. Angela responded, her voice a quiet blade. "I'm not disrupting anything, I'm asking for the respect any customer deserves." The boutique's air felt suffocating, its elegance tainted by the raw prejudice laid bare. Angela's heart burned, with purpose, fueled by every door slammed in her face, every doubt cast on her worth, and she knew her next move would shift the ground beneath this glittering empire. The air in Prestige Couture grew thick with tension, as Richard Lawson's threat to have Angela Carter forcibly removed reverberated through the showroom, his words a cold blade aimed at her dignity, transforming the boutique's glittering elegance into a stark arena of confrontation. His face, flushed with the fervor of unchecked power, betrayed a flicker of triumph as he repeated, "You're disrupting our clientele, ma'am. Leave now or face the consequences," his voice loud enough to ensure every patron heard the ultimatum. The sapphire blue clutch, locked in its glass case, seemed a distant relic now, overshadowed by the raw hostility of Richard's campaign to expel Angela, her modest navy coat and simple demeanor a challenge to the boutique's rigid hierarchy. Evelyn Grant leaned forward on her velvet stool, her champagne glass forgotten, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of watching an outsider humbled, while Charles and Laura Bennett stood closer together, their faces a mix of smug anticipation and faint unease as if sensing the moral line being crossed. Angela stood resolute, her heart a steady drumbeat of courage, her eyes meeting Richard's with an intensity that seemed to pierce his bravado, her presence a quiet rebellion against the tide of prejudice crashing around her. She knew this moment was bigger than a single refusal. It was a stand for every soul who had been deemed unworthy in spaces like this, their worth erased by gatekeepers of privilege. Sarah Miller, the young sales associate, stood behind a display of pearl necklaces, her hands trembling as she clutched a velvet box, her eyes glistening with a mix of fear and admiration as she watched Angela's unyielding calm. Marcus Tate, the security guard, remained frozen, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of Richard's command, his dark eyes reflecting a storm of conflict as he grappled with his role in enforcing an injustice he knew was wrong. Angela's mind turned to a pivotal moment from her youth, when a librarian had defended her against a teacher who questioned her right to join an advanced class. Her quiet advocacy, a lesson in the power of standing firm. That memory anchored her now, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm not leaving, Mr. Lawson. I'm asking for fairness, something you've denied me from the moment I walked in." Her words were a beacon, cutting through the boutique's oppressive, herein exposing the selective courtesy that defined its culture. Richard's jaw tightened, his cufflinks flashing as he gestured sharply to Marcus, his tone now a venomous hiss. "You're forcing my hand. This is about protecting our standards, not personal feelings." The lie was transparent. No one had questioned Evelyn's right to try on a $20,000 necklace, nor had Charles and Laura been asked to prove their wealth before browsing. The patrons' murmurs grew, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others filming with rapt attention, their phones glowing in the dim light as the confrontation became a public reckoning. Angela's heart ached for the countless others who had faced this same dismissal, their dreams of being seen as equal crushed by systems that valued appearance over humanity. She thought of a co-worker from her first job, a brilliant analyst whose ideas were ignored because her modest background didn't match the corporate elite, her potential buried under prejudice. That injustice strengthened Angela's resolve, her voice rising with quiet authority. "Your standards seem to apply only to certain faces. I've seen no one else treated this way today." The truth of her words silenced Evelyn's whispers, her face stiffening as if caught in a lie, while Charles shifted uncomfortably, his tie askew. Laura's hand tightened on her purse, her earlier amusement replaced by a flicker of guilt, as if the weight of complicity settled over her. Sarah's box slipped slightly, her eyes locked on Angela with a growing resolve, as if inspired to find her own voice. Marcus took a reluctant step forward, his voice barely audible. "Ma'am, please, I don't want to do this." His plea a raw admission of his trapped position. Angela's gaze softened toward him, her heart reaching out to his struggle, knowing he was caught in a system that demanded obedience over conscience. The boutique's chandeliers cast long shadows, their light no longer a symbol of luxury, but a stark reminder of the ugliness beneath the surface. Richard pressed his advantage, his voice booming. "We can't allow disruptions to our operations. You're leaving one way or another." The threat was a desperate grasp at control, but Angela's unshaken demeanor made it clear she would not be moved. The crowd's phones glowed brighter, some now streaming live, their faces a mix of outrage and awe as Angela's stand became a symbol of resistance. Her heart burned with a fire kindled by every moment she'd been underestimated. Every door closed in her face, and she responded, her voice a steady flame. "I'm not the disruption your bias is, and I won't let it silence me." The boutique's air felt charged now, its elegance tainted by the truth she'd laid bare, and Angela knew her next words would ignite a shift that could not be undone. The air in Prestige Couture was electric with tension as Richard Lawson's voice thundered through the showroom, his final ultimatum to have Angela Carter removed a desperate bid to cling to his crumbling authority, his words slicing through the boutique's opulent facade like a storm tearing at a fragile veil. The sapphire blue clutch, locked behind glass, stood forgotten, its beauty eclipsed by a confrontation that had transformed the space into a crucible of justice, with patrons' phones glowing as they recorded the unfolding drama, their eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and anticipation. Richard's face was a mask of fury, his tailored suit and silver cufflinks no match for Angela's unyielding presence, her navy coat and calm demeanor a quiet defiance that seemed to shake the very foundations of his world. Evelyn Grant sat, frozen on a velvet bench, her diamond earrings still, her earlier laughter silenced by the gravity of the moment, while Charles and Laura Bennett stood rigid, their designer attire a hollow shield, their faces pale as they sensed the tide turning. Sarah Miller, the young sales associate, gripped a silk scarf display, her hands trembling, her eyes locked on Angela with a reverence that spoke of a heart stirred by courage. Marcus Tate, the security guard, stood poised at the room's edge, his broad frame tense, his dark eyes reflecting a turmoil born of knowing the injustice he was being asked to enforce, his hesitation a silent rebellion against Richard's command. Angela's heart beat with a fierce resolve, her mind turning to a cherished memory of her grandmother, a nurse who had faced segregation yet treated every patient with dignity, her quiet strength a beacon for Angela now. With a steady breath, Angela stepped forward, her voice ringing with an authority that hushed the room. "Before you act, Mr. Lawson, know this. I am Angela Carter, CEO of Prestige Couture." The revelation was a seismic shock, the boutique's elegance shattered by the truth, a single sentence that rewrote the narrative of power in the room. Richard's face drained of color, his mouth agape, his hands falling limp as his authority dissolved like mist, his earlier threats now a hollow echo. Sarah let out a soft cry, the scarf slipping from her grasp, her eyes brimming with tears of awe as she realized the woman she dismissed was her leader. Marcus stepped back, his shoulders relaxing, his face a blend of relief and shame, his eyes meeting Angela's with a silent vow to never again doubt such strength. Evelyn's champagne glass clattered to the floor, her face ashen, her earlier smugness replaced by a quiet reckoning with her own prejudice. Charles and Laura clutched each other's hands, their earlier arrogance replaced by a stunned humility, as if the world they'd known had shifted beneath them. Angela reached into her canvas tote, producing an ID card emblazoned with her name and title. Angela Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Prestige Couture. The photo a perfect match, her poised expression a mirror of the woman who now commanded the room. Richard stammered, his voice weak. "That can't be, I need proof," but Angela held the ID aloft, her tone firm. "You'll call Elizabeth Harper, our COO, to confirm her numbers in your records." Sarah rushed to the phone, her hands steady despite her tears, dialing Elizabeth with a newfound purpose, her eyes never leaving Angela, as if anchoring herself to this moment of justice. The patrons' phones glowed brighter, some streaming live, their murmurs turning to gasps as the truth rippled through the crowd, the boutique's chandeliers casting a radiant light that seemed to bless the shift unfolding. Angela's heart swelled with the pain and pride of every person who had been judged unworthy in such spaces, her thoughts turning to a young poet from her neighborhood, whose words were rejected by elite circles for their raw honesty, her voice silenced until Angela's stand gave it wings. Richard's shoulders slumped, his phone slipping from his hand, his world unraveling as Elizabeth's voice confirmed Angela's identity, sealing his defeat. The crowd's reactions softened, some nodding in respect, others lowering their phones, as if the act of filming could no longer capture the profundity of the moment. Angela stood tall, her gaze sweeping the room, her voice gentle but resolute. "This isn't about me, it's about every person who's been made to feel less in a place like this. Today we start anew, with respect for all." Her words were a promise, a vow to reshape Prestige Couture into a beacon of fairness, and as Sarah hung up the phone, her face alight with hope, and Marcus stood straighter, his role now one of ally, the boutique felt transformed, its elegance no longer a barrier, but a canvas for change. Angela's heart carried the legacy of her grandmother's compassion, the poet's courage, and the countless others whose struggles had paved her path, and she knew this moment would echo beyond these walls, inspiring a world where dignity was the truest luxury. As the crowd began to applaud, not for spectacle but for truth, Angela's eyes met Sarah's and Marcus's, a shared understanding that they had witnessed the birth of a new era, one where every soul could walk through these doors and be seen, their worth undeniable, their stories forever honored.